The chamber grows colder after Soderini departs, as though the walls reclaim the temperature they prefer, ancient, disciplined, indifferent. Machiavelli remains seated for a long moment, letting the weight of what has been entrusted to him settle like fine dust across his thoughts. Not fear, not triumph, something quieter. The awareness that the first step of an ascent is rarely seen by those who take it. He stands and moves toward the window. Florence stretches beneath him like a tapestry woven from shadow and ember. The rooftops glimmer with moonlight. The narrow streets curl like veins carrying the restless pulse of a city that has never learned to sleep. From some far piazza drifts the faint laughter of taverns, yet even that laughter carries tension, as though each voice lowers instinctively when the Medici name slips through a whisper. This is the world he enters now, not a world of armies or banners, but corridors of fragile alliances and concealed daggers. Influence does not bloom in sunlight. It grows in the dim corners of uncertainty, where men test one another with smiles sharpened by suspicion. He studies the lantern's reflection in the glass. The trembling flame looks like a star trapped within the window, pleading for release. Its flicker aligns with the rhythm of his breath. In silence, he begins to understand the law that will define his first steps. To rise, one must first learn to be comfortable in rooms where nothing is said, yet everything is decided. A gust of wind rattles the panes, breaking the stillness. Machiavelli turns, gathering the scrolls left on the table. His fingers brush the wax seals, symbols of authority he does not yet fully possess, but soon may serve. As he prepares to leave, the chamber door creaks open again, softer this time. A younger clerk slips inside, carrying an armful of documents. His eyes widen slightly upon seeing Machiavelli still present. Messer Niccolo. The clerk stammers, bowing awkwardly. I did not expect. Machiavelli offers a calm nod. Neither did I. The clerk relaxes only a little. Is it true? There will be a mission at dawn? Machiavelli pauses. He reads the man's posture, the tremble in his voice, the eagerness behind the fear. This one is hungry for information, not danger. He longs for proximity to power without understanding its cost. The kind of man courts often swallow. It will be announced when appropriate, Machiavelli replies, careful to neither confirm nor deny. Influence begins by controlling what others think you know. The clerk nods quickly, though confusion clouds his features. He steps aside to give Machiavelli space to pass. As Machiavelli walks by, he feels the young man's gaze linger on him, not out of admiration, but calculation. The same way men in Florence have always looked at one another, as potential allies, potential threats, or potential ghosts. He exits into the corridor, where the torches cast long bars of gold across the floor. The flames crackle, their sound merging with the distant hum of the city. His footsteps echo softly in the stone passageway, each step a quiet affirmation that he is no longer merely a spectator in the machinery of Florence. He is becoming a moving piece. As he approaches the archway leading outside, cool air flows toward him, carrying the rich scent of the Arno River. The night sky arches overhead, enormous and indifferent. Stars glimmer faintly behind drifting clouds. He descends the steps slowly, the marble chilled beneath his soles. Below, the courtyard lies in semi-darkness. A lone guard leans against a column, dozing lightly, his helmet tilted forward. Beyond the gates, the city stretches into uncertainty. Machiavelli steps into the open air. The wind brushes past him like a warning and a welcome. There is no applause for the first step of an ascent, no audience waiting, only the quiet recognition that a different life has begun. He walks through the courtyard and out the gates of the Palazzo Vecchio. The streets greet him with their familiar narrowness, shuttered windows, flickering oil lamps, the faint splash of water trickling in stone channels. A cloaked figure passes him quickly, head down. A whisper drifts from a balcony above. Florence is always watching. He makes his way toward his modest home, each street corner illuminated by faint glimmers of moonlight. The city breathes around him, ancient, alive, volatile. Tomorrow, he will leave it behind for a mission he does not yet understand. But tonight, he walks as a man who has stepped past the invisible line separating the ordinary from the consequential. Before entering his doorway, he pauses and looks back at the palazzo rising against the night sky. Its tower stands like a stern guardian over the sleeping city, a threshold crossed, a silence understood, a path begun. He exhales, opens the door, and lets the darkness swallow him gently. Dawn arrives not with warmth, but with a pale, uncertain light that bleeds slowly across the Florentine rooftops. The sky carries the faint blue of tempered steel, and the wind bears the first cold breath of the day, preparing to test those who dare to rise. Machiavelli stands in the courtyard of the Palazzo Vecchio, cloak drawn tight. Watching the horizon brighten behind the distant hills, the city seems suspended in a fragile moment between sleep and awakening. As if Florence itself holds its breath in anticipation, a small delegation gathers, boots scraping softly against the stone. No one speaks loudly. The art demands reverence, and the presence of Soderini demands discipline. Horses snort in the crisp morning air, their shadows stretching long across the flagstones. A raven circles overhead before landing on a tower's ledge, tilting its head as though judging the assembly below. Soderini emerges from the archway, his step steady, his expression unreadable. Even in the muted light, the lines on his face seem carved by decades of political winters. He surveys the delegation, his gaze moving from man to man until it settles briefly, deliberately, on Machiavelli. Not long enough to draw attention, just long enough for a message only one man is meant to receive. This is the art Machiavelli begins to understand. Influence starts not when you are seen, but when someone important chooses to see you. He mounts his horse without flourish. There is a grace in his movements, not elegance, but precision, the kind of ease that comes from years of knowing that every gesture is observed by someone hungry for meaning. In the world of power, nothing is accidental. A glance can be a command. A pause can be a declaration. Even silence can build a reputation thicker than armor. As the group moves through the city gates, the streets shift from empty to alive. Merchants stir beneath half-open stalls. Children chase each other through alleys. Women carry baskets wrapped in cloth to preserve the warmth of morning bread. Yet as the delegation passes, the noise dims. People step aside not out of fear, but instinct. When authority moves, the world adjusts. Machiavelli feels their eyes on him. Though none linger openly, he is not a known figure, not yet, but he rides among men who are, and proximity alone casts its shadow. The weight of being observed quietly, curiously presses upon him with a sensation both unfamiliar and awakening. He keeps his posture measured, shoulders relaxed, gaze forward, the controlled breathing of a man neither timid nor eager. The powerful recognize hunger too quickly. They avoid men who show it too soon. A nobleman once told Machiavelli that the first sign of a climber is the way he watches the room. But the second sign, the more dangerous one, is how the room begins to watch him back. They cross the Ponte alla Carraia as the sun climbs higher, its light catching the river in thin golden strokes. The Arno moves slowly, dark and reflective like a mind weighing consequences. Water laps against the stone foundations, carrying the faint smell of algae and damp wood. A merchant bows as the delegation passes. His eyes flick upward, seeking recognition that does not come. Machiavelli studies the small exchanges, the way Soderini keeps his chin slightly elevated, the controlled angle of his shoulders, the steady pace of his horse. Nothing hurried, nothing unsure. The confidence of a man who understands the stage is as important as the play itself. This is the truth whispered through centuries of courts. Power is most convincing when it does not try. By midday, the city falls behind them. Hills roll outward like waves of slumbering giants. Cypress trees stand tall and unwavering, their dark silhouettes cutting through the sky. A faint trail of dust rises behind the horses, curling in the air before fading into nothingness. As they ride, Soderini slows his pace until Machiavelli draws near. The elder statesman keeps his gaze on the horizon as he speaks. "You understand why you are here." He says not a question, but an opening. Machiavelli answers with measured calm. "To observe." Soderini nods once. "But not merely observe others." His voice lowers. "Observe yourself. How you carry presence. How you fill space without crowding it. Influence begins with the way the world receives your silhouette." The words settle into Machiavelli's thoughts like stones sinking gently into water. Presence, stillness, observation. These are the first tools of Ascension. A gust of wind sweeps across the hillside, carrying dust and the sharp scent of rosemary. Machiavelli adjusts his grip on the reins, steadies his breathing, and lets the lesson root itself deep within him. He rides unaware now of every eye, every gesture, every silence, aware that he is being observed. And that this, too, is part of the climb. The road bends toward a valley shaped by centuries of footsteps. Merchants, soldiers, fugitives, and diplomats whose names dissolved into dust long before this morning. The delegation rides in a narrow line, their shadows stretching long on the pale earth. Machiavelli keeps his place near the middle, where a man may see without being centered, listen without being addressed. The wind shifts intermittently, carrying whispers from the front of the line to the back, fragments of strategy, muted anxieties, the rustle of cloaks. What fascinates him most is not the words spoken, but the rhythms in which they travel. Influence travels the same way, rarely direct, rarely loud. It moves in the in-between spaces, like water threading through cracks in stone. As the sun climbs higher, they reach a small outpost perched on a ridge overlooking the valley below. An old watchtower stands silent beside it, its stones blackened by forgotten fires. Soderini lifts a hand, signaling for the delegation to halt. Dust settles around their horses' hooves like a loose veil. A guard emerges from the outpost, bowing quickly to Soderini. His eyes linger on the emissaries, measuring each man instinctively. When they fall upon Machiavelli, they pause not with recognition, but curiosity. There is something in the way Machiavelli holds himself still, attentive, quietly anchored, that draws attention without demanding it. This is the second law he begins to sense. The world watches most closely those who seem to listen to it. Inside the outpost, a long wooden table occupies the center of a dim room lit by a single slit of sunlight. Dust drifts lazily in the beam, turning the air into a slow-moving tapestry. Maps are spread across the table, territories divided by ink, ambition, and rivers that care nothing for politics. Soderini leans over one of the maps, tracing the edge of a border with his fingertip. The others cluster around him, whispering about alliances and threats. Machiavelli remains slightly behind, precisely where a man can hear most clearly without seeming to intrude. He studies the map's terrain lines, the faded parchment, the small notations scribbled in Latin. Each mark carries a consequence. Each curve of ink represents a path armies may take or emissaries may die upon. But what interests him most is not the geography, it is the men reading it. A nobleman named Ridolfi clears his throat and speaks. His voice quivers slightly when he suggests tightening patrols along the northern pass. His eyes dart from Soderini to the others, searching for approval. The very act exposes him. Influence is allergic to insecurity. Even a tremor in speech can shift respect to doubt. Another counselor, older and broader in stature, counters Ridolfi with a calm, steady tone. He speaks slowly, anchoring each sentence with quiet certainty. The room leans toward his voice. Machiavelli notes this carefully, the power of pace, not volume. Soderini listens without revealing preference. His silence has a shape to it, neither agreement nor dismissal. This, too, is a language. When the discussion reaches a momentary lull, Soderini glances toward Machiavelli. It is a small gesture, noticed by few, but it strikes like a bell in a chamber. Machiavelli feels the gaze, feels the expectation within it, and chooses not to step forward. Instead, he meets Soderini's eyes with steady calm, acknowledging the moment, but not seizing it prematurely. The elder statesman gives the faintest nod approval of restraint. In the courts of the powerful, timing is everything. A lesser man would have spoken. A desperate man would have offered a clever insight. But influence grows strongest in those who understand when silence is more valuable than brilliance. After the council disperses to rest before the next leg of the journey, Soderini calls him quietly to the side. "You watch well," he says. Machiavelli inclines his head. Observation reveals the truth long before words do. Soderini's lips curve into a thin, knowing line. "Then observe this, Niccolo. Men reveal who they are not when they speak, but when they believe someone important is watching." He steps away, leaving the words suspended like incense in the air. Machiavelli stands alone beside the table. He traces the edge of the map as he recalls Soderini's teachings, the conversations, the glances, the tremors in men's voices. He understands now that he is being studied just as he studies others. And this is not a threat. It is an invitation, a quiet acknowledgement that he is beginning to matter. In rooms where he was once invisible, he exhales slowly, letting the realization settle. Influence is not earned through spectacle. It is earned through the quiet art of being observed well. The afternoon light begins to soften, shifting the valley into a palette of silvered green and shadowed ochre. Horses graze in patches of sunlit grass, and the distant hills hum with the faint stir of wind. Machiavelli rides beside Soderini, who keeps his face toward the horizon, yet somehow sees everything. The subtle tilt of a man's head, the hesitation in a hand brushing a cloak, the way the sunlight catches a fleeting gesture. It is here, amidst open fields and silent observation, that Machiavelli begins to understand the weight of being watched, not the burden of scrutiny, but the shaping force it can become. Influence, he realizes, does not come from commanding attention, it comes from controlling how attention falls. how it lingers, and where it turns. The delegation halts at a shaded grove, a quiet shelter from the midday heat. The horses are tethered to low branches, the leaves whispering with a gentle rhythm. Machiavelli dismounts and walks among them, noting how each man's posture relaxes slightly once they are off their mounts. Yet tension remains in the subtle angles of shoulders and the occasional flick of a wrist. Power, he thinks, is never entirely free of self-awareness. It lingers in the small, unconscious movements that speak louder than speeches. Soderini approaches and gestures to a rough-hewn bench beneath a fig tree. "Sit," he says. "Watch, and remember that every motion carries meaning." Machiavelli obeys, letting his gaze drift over the assembly. One emissary scratches his chin, eyes scanning the map of borders still rolled in inked parchment. Another traces the edge of his scabbard, as if counting the weight of authority it implies. A third murmurs to a companion, words lost in the rustle of leaves. Yet the intensity of the gesture reveals his concern far more clearly than any spoken phrase could. It is a subtle language, this quiet ballet of observation. Machiavelli feels himself decoding it in real time. He notices the way respect is given and withdrawn through eye contact alone. How small acts of composure ripple outward, subtly shifting perception. Influence is not loud. Influence is the echo of restraint, the measured presence that asks no permission but claims notice nonetheless. Soderini watches him. "You understand why this matters, do you not?" he asks. A man who does not know how he is seen can never navigate these halls. The powerful will test you in ways you cannot predict. They will measure your attention, your timing, even your silence. Machiavelli nods. Yes, the world observes before it acknowledges. One must learn the language of the unseen. The elder statesman's gaze sharpens. Exactly. And there is no shame in silence, only in haste. Remember this, a man may speak wisely, yet be forgotten if he does not first place himself where eyes naturally fall. Yet lips remain cautious. Appearances are the canvas upon which influence is painted. Machiavelli lets the lesson settle. The grove is quiet now. The birds have retreated to the deeper foliage. Only the occasional whisper of leaves or a distant crow punctuates the space. He senses that the true test of being observed is not in the performance, but in the quiet mastery of presence, the ability to be acknowledged without assertion, to be noticed without intrusion. As the group remounts their horses and resumes their journey, Machiavelli rides with deliberate attention. He studies not just the people around him, but himself in relation to them, how his posture draws the gaze, how his quiet attentiveness commands respect without a word, how the act of restraint itself becomes a form of communication. By the time the city reappears on the horizon, bathed in the amber glow of early evening, Machiavelli understands the first true law of ascension. To be powerful, one must first master the art of being observed, not for vanity, not for recognition, but because influence lives in the subtle understanding of presence, timing, and perception. He allows himself a faint exhale. The climb has begun, and the path ahead, though unseen, already hums with possibility. The dusk of Florence spreads like wet velvet over the city's rooftops, and the Palazzo Vecchio rises, dark and immovable, against the dying light. Machiavelli walks through the courtyard alone, the soft scrape of his boots on stone echoing like a metronome in the silent expanse. The wind drifts from the Arno, carrying the scent of river mud, wood smoke, and faint iron remnants of a city that thrives on contracts, promises, and debts too easily broken. Loyalty is the air here, but it is thick with risk. Machiavelli pauses beneath an arch, letting the fading sun cast long shadows across his face. In Florence, every allegiance is weighted by calculation. A man's fidelity is never measured solely by words. It is recorded in gestures, in moments of choice when the stakes are highest and no one is watching. It is in these moments that power learns who may be trusted and who may be discarded. He recalls the day he observed Francesco Guicciardini in council, debating on a law of taxation with a quiet force that commanded assent without violence. Guicciardini's allies were careful to show alignment, but Machiavelli noticed the subtle falter in. Outside, a thin drizzle begins, falling onto the cobblestones with the soft, irregular rhythm of distant bells. Machiavelli looks through the window at the wet streets glimmering in lamplight, each puddle a mirror reflecting the city's restless eyes. Trust is rare, he realizes, and yet, without it, even the strongest mind is tethered to nothing but uncertainty and isolation. A quiet knock interrupts his thoughts. A messenger hands him a folded note, its seal intact. He studies the emblem, a minor official requesting counsel regarding alliances with the northern territories. Even in the simplest gestures, Machiavelli recognizes the interplay of loyalty and power. The man is loyal enough to ask, cautious enough to defer, and yet the true measure lies in whether he will act if pressed. Machiavelli sets the note down. Outside, the night deepens. The city hums softly beneath the cloak of darkness. Indifferent to the ambitions it shelters, he realizes that the most valuable loyalty is invisible to the untrained eye. It is given freely by those who understand, trusted quietly by those who calculate, and maintained only by those who wield discretion with exactitude. He closes his eyes briefly, letting the candlelight flicker across the walls, throwing the shadows of shelves and parchments into delicate chaos. Loyalty, he reflects, is a weight one must bear with care. Too heavy, and it crushes. Too light, and it drifts away into wind and forgetfulness. The ascent toward influence is paved not only with observation, cunning, and presence, but with the fragile, exacting art of loyalty. Night deepens over Florence, and Machiavelli steps onto the narrow balcony of his study, the chill of the stone pressing against his palms. Below, the Arno winds through the city like a dark vein, reflecting torchlight and moonlight in equal measure. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolls, slow and deliberate, marking an hour that belongs only to those who keep watch over the affairs of men. Loyalty, he realizes, is measured in such hours, in the quiet dedication of those who act when no one observes, in the steady consistency of those whose service remains unbroken by temptation or fear. Earlier, at Soderini's instruction, Machiavelli had witnessed a small test of allegiance. A minor emissary was asked to carry delicate correspondence to a rival city-state. One misstep, one moment of hesitation, and the consequences would ripple into open suspicion. The man's hands trembled slightly as he folded the papers, his eyes flicking to the observers, gauging their perception of his resolve. Loyalty, Machiavelli notes, reveals itself most clearly not in comfort but in pressure. It is forged in quiet, invisible trials where courage is measured by the mind rather than the sword. The delegation had returned with the emissary intact, but the eyes of the council lingered not in praise, but in study. Every act of fidelity becomes a mark upon a man's record, woven invisibly into the web of power. Machiavelli observed, memorized, and reflected. A misstep here could fracture trust for years. A display of steadfastness could open doors that even brilliance alone could not unlock. Influence, he understands, is not simply about knowing whom to approach but knowing whom to carry with you. He recalls lessons from the Medici court, men who swore loyalty to the family, yet plotted subtly beneath their smiles, bending words to serve personal ambition. In the quiet corridors, in the flicker of candlelight on polished floors, the truth of allegiance reveals itself through hesitation, eye movement, and the tone of a whispered greeting. A man who fails to perceive these signs is destined to stumble. A man who does, however, may rise imperceptibly, unnoticed until the weight of his loyalty is too significant to ignore. Machiavelli's own thoughts drift to the subtle balance between obedience and self-interest. To give loyalty too freely is to risk being consumed by those one serves. To hold it too tightly is to breed suspicion. Influence requires discernment, the precise calibration of fidelity, earned by understanding the motivations, fears, and desires of those one seeks to impress or accompany. The strongest bonds are often invisible unspoken promises upheld not by threat, but by recognition of mutual necessity. Outside, the wind shifts and carries the faint murmur of distant voices, guards patrolling, citizens returning from late business, the soft splash of water along stone gutters. Machiavelli breathes deeply, sensing the rhythm of the city as one might sense the pulse of a patient. Every choice he has observed today, every micro-shift in posture or expression, informs a subtle architecture of power. Loyalty is its keystone, fragile yet central, capable of supporting entire hierarchies or letting them crumble silently. He moves back inside, the candlelight flickering over stacks of parchment. Each document, each seal, each careful note is a thread in a tapestry of trust. He writes slowly, deliberately, capturing insights that will not be spoken aloud for many years. Loyalty is not celebrated, but its absence is felt immediately. In corridors of power, the unseen debts and silent bonds shape the destiny of nations. Machiavelli leans back, letting the weight of the day settle across his shoulders. The quiet lesson is clear. Those who would ascend must understand the value of loyalty, in all its subtle forms. Not its proclamation, but its presence. Not its performance, but its substance. To wield influence is to carry this weight, to sense it in every glance and gesture, to honor it in silence as much as in speech. Outside, Florence sleeps under a canopy of stars, indifferent to the small calculations of men. And yet, in the unseen hours of night, the first threads of loyalty begin to form the invisible scaffolding upon which empires are built. Machiavelli knows he must walk this path carefully, measuring each step against the shifting balance of devotion and self-preservation, aware that every alliance carries both opportunity and peril. The next morning arrives like a faint sigh, the sun creeping hesitantly over terracotta rooftops, turning Florence into a wash of muted gold and shadow. Machiavelli rides again with the delegation, yet today the streets feel different, denser with expectation, heavier with the knowledge that loyalty can turn suddenly into accusation. He notices subtle changes in posture, fleeting glances that signal caution or distrust. Each man carries not only himself, but the silent ledger of fidelity, and Machiavelli reads it with growing precision. As they pass through a narrow lane, a young page stumbles, spilling a bundle of letters. The men pause, some with irritation, some with indifference. Machiavelli dismounts, gathering the papers with calm hands. The small act, simple, quiet, unassuming, does not go unnoticed. Soderini's gaze briefly meets his, and in that fleeting recognition lies a message. Loyalty and competence are inseparable. Influence, once again, emerges not in declarations, but in the precise execution of ordinary actions under observation. Later, in the temporary encampment outside the city, Machiavelli observes the emissaries ranging tents and distributing rations. The smallest gestures, the precise placement of a bag, the manner of handing a cup of water, each carries weight. A man who seeks power must see the world as a tapestry of interlinked acts, each thread influencing perception. Here, loyalty manifests in diligence, attentiveness, and discretion. Those who understand this move unnoticed, yet leave the strongest impressions. Soderini calls a private council at dusk, the firelight flickering against stone walls and gilded maps. Machiavelli takes his place slightly behind the main table, watching closely as allegiances play out in microcosm. One emissary, outwardly confident, deflects a question with a practiced smile, yet his fingers drum nervously on the edge of the table. Another swears agreement while stealing a glance at a companion, silently negotiating future advantage. These are the signals that define power, not words alone, but the unspoken currents of trust and intent flowing beneath them. Soderini speaks quietly to Machiavelli. Observe how they act when they believe the spotlight is elsewhere. This is when loyalty truly reveals itself. Public fealty is easy. Private consistency is rare. Machiavelli nods, understanding the subtle distinction. Influence depends not on proximity to power alone, but on the ability to discern these currents, to navigate them without tipping the balance too soon or too boldly. Night falls fully, and the camp is hushed except for the crackle of firewood. Machiavelli steps outside, the scent of damp earth and pine filling the air. Stars glimmer faintly above, indifferent to the intricate plays of men below. He considers the delicate tension that binds loyalty to ambition, the unseen debts, the quiet promises, the silent judgments. To command influence, a man must respect these forces, honor them in careful calculation, and never mistake compliance for devotion. A brief drizzle begins, scattering the flames of torches into halos of silver. Machiavelli returns to his quarters. Opening the scrolls collected during the day, he reviews them meticulously, noting who acted with care, who wavered, and who observed without action. Each decision is a brushstroke, a mark on the canvas of loyalty. Influence, he realizes, is built slowly, patiently, by those who understand the rhythm of fidelity, both given and withheld. Before sleep, he stands at the window, looking over the darkened landscape. In the quiet, he understands a deeper truth. The ascent toward power is not forged in dramatic gestures or bold declarations. It is carried forward in the steady accumulation of trust, in the observation of those whose loyalty may be tested tomorrow, and in the quiet mastery of one's own presence. The city sleeps, yet the invisible architecture of influence is being woven around him. Every glance, every gesture, every act of fidelity or its absence sets the stage for tomorrow's climb. He closes his eyes, the flicker of candlelight casting shadows that seem to dance with unspoken promises. The weight of loyalty, delicate and essential, rests on his shoulders. He carries it with care, aware that the strength of a man is measured not only in his ambition, but in the trust he earns and the bonds he protects. Twilight descends over Florence with the softness of a whispered secret, the horizon a molten line of crimson and violet that melts into the rising darkness. Machiavelli walks along the narrow streets of the city, the stones damp beneath his boots from a brief afternoon rain. Lanterns flicker to life, casting long, trembling shadows that twist across shuttered windows and empty alleys. Each shadow moves as if alive, reflecting not only light, but the intentions of the men who pass beneath it. He pauses at the corner of a quiet piazza, listening to the distant murmur of the Arno. The river's slow current carries the faint echo of boats, voices, and the endless rhythm of a city that observes itself as much as it observes others. In this quiet, Machiavelli begins to understand the most elusive force in Florence: perception. It is the currency by which men are judged, a subtle yet unyielding arbiter of fate. To control perception is to control the trajectory of influence. To misread it is to stumble before the climb has begun. Earlier, at Soderini's directive, he attended a gathering of minor nobles and diplomats in a modest hall adorned with faded frescoes. The room is heavy with the scent of oil lamps and candle wax, the walls absorbing whispers, laughter, and the faint clink of goblets. Every movement, every tilt of a head, every pause in conversation carries meaning. Machiavelli observes closely. One man tilts his chin upward to signal authority. Another arches an eyebrow in skepticism. A subtle turn of a glove, a quiet glance, the soft shift of a chair all betray a story beneath polite words. Soderini, standing at the head of the hall, allows the conversations to unfold like threads in a tapestry. He says little, yet his presence shapes the room. The subtle rise and fall of his gaze directs attention, encourages submission, and rewards alignment without uttering a command. Influence, Machiavelli notes, is often about shaping perception invisibly. It is not enough to be correct, or capable, or even clever. One must be seen as worthy, indispensable, and composed. In the flickering candlelight, Machiavelli practices the art of stillness. He positions himself in the periphery, watching without intrusion, listening without apparent attention. Those around him adjust their posture, their expressions, their tone. They do not yet know he is observing. This is the advantage of perception. It is rarely mutual. The one who sees most clearly controls the flow of influence long before a word is spoken. He recalls a minor encounter from earlier in the day. A diplomat leaned forward to argue a point, unaware that the subtle tightening of his jaw had betrayed both impatience and insecurity. A noble woman feigned indifference, yet her fingers tightened on the edge of her chair. Machiavelli notes these signals as a scholar notes plants in a garden, each gesture a seed that may grow into trust, alliance, or betrayal. Outside, the evening wind rises, carrying the faint fragrance of wet earth, red ovens, and distant incense from a convent. The world beyond the walls seems slow, measured, yet it pulses with the silent language of observation. Machiavelli breathes in the damp air and feels the weight of the lesson settling. The dance of perception is not about what is said, but how one is perceived in silence, in action, in restraint. Soderini steps closer, his shadow stretching over Machiavelli's as he murmurs, "Do you see, Niccolo? Men reveal their truths not through declaration, but through the subtle sway of posture, the quiet flicker of attention. The one who understands these currents may guide them, without ever raising a hand." Machiavelli nods, recognizing the quiet gravity of the moment. Influence is a choreography, invisible yet precise. Those who fail to grasp it stumble, no matter how clever or ambitious. Those who master it move through the corridors of power like dancers on an unseen stage, their presence shaping the world around them before a word is spoken. He steps back from the gathering, letting the hall recede behind him into shadow. The lantern's glow flutters on the walls, revealing glimpses of faces frozen mid-gesture, moments captured in light and darkness. Machiavelli breathes slowly, sensing that every look, every pause, every subtle movement will guide him forward, and that the city itself is watching, shaping him as surely as he shapes it. The streets of Florence darken as night settles like a velvet curtain, yet the city hums with invisible rhythms, footsteps, whispers, doors closing softly. Machiavelli walks among them, aware that perception is not merely a property of grand halls or council chambers, but of every glance exchanged in shadowed alleys and crowded markets. Even in the smallest gestures, influence asserts itself. A tilt of the head, a deliberate pause, the subtle modulation of tone, these are the instruments of power. Earlier, he had observed a minor noble attempting to impress a visiting diplomat. With an ostentatious display of knowledge, he gestured too broadly, laughed too loudly, and allowed impatience to color his words. Machiavelli noticed the reactions of the surrounding council, a quiet withdrawal here, a slight narrowing of eyes there. The diplomat's attention wavered, subtly drawn to others whose composure did not demand correction. Influence is fragile. The misalignment of perception can undo it entirely. At a small tavern tucked between two stone buildings, he witnesses a similar lesson. A merchant debates the quality of wool with a customer, his tone assertive yet humble. Though the words are mundane, the merchant's posture, timing, and measured emphasis win the patron's trust more effectively than any speech could. Machiavelli reflects that perception governs not only the halls of power, but the everyday transactions of life. It is a thread that binds all interactions, visible only to those who know how to read it. He recalls Soderini's earlier counsel, Niccolo. Men are less concerned with what you do than with how it appears. Even loyalty and skill, when poorly framed, are meaningless. One must learn to dance in the eye of the observer, shaping their understanding without revealing the choreography. As the evening deepens, Machiavelli finds himself at the Ponte Vecchio. The arches cast dark reflections on the Arno, each ripple a miniature distortion of the world above. He watches the merchants packing their wares, the occasional passerby's glance, and considers the city as a vast theater, each actor playing a role both public and hidden. Influence, he knows, is the careful calibration of perception within this theater. Those who dominate it bend the world subtly, yet irrevocably. In a private corner of the bridge, a young scribe hurries past, knocking into a basket of fruit. The spill draws a few frustrated sighs, yet Machiavelli notices the quick correction, the measured apology, the effort to restore dignity without drawing undue attention. Even in this minor event, perception governs outcome. Humility and control earn unspoken respect. While arrogance invites quiet scorn, the wind shifts, carrying the scent of the river, wet stone, and wood smoke from nearby homes. Machiavelli pulls his cloak tighter, sensing the subtle interplay of light, sound, and movement around him. Every shadow offers a lesson. Every flicker of reflection hints at the way the world will interpret action. Influence is a mirror, and those who master it know which images to reveal, which to conceal. Soderini's presence lingers in his mind the way a teacher's voice echoes in a silent classroom. Observe, understand, and anticipate. The world does not forgive those who misread its signals. Even a moment of inattention can ripple into irrelevance. Machiavelli breathes in the night air, committing the lesson to memory. Influence is neither immediate nor brute. It is a subtle architecture, built on the quiet manipulation of perception, tempered by patience and insight. As he turns back toward the city, Machiavelli senses the invisible eyes that watch him, as they always have. The dance is continuous, unending, demanding constant awareness. To misstep is to falter. To step carefully, deliberately, is to move unseen yet effectively through a world that judges every flicker of motion. Tonight, he walks as both observer and participant, aware that perception is a weapon, a shield, and the most intricate instrument of influence. And with each measured step, he feels himself learning the rhythm of the dance, preparing for the subtle, unyielding tests that tomorrow will bring. Night has thickened over Florence, turning the city into a mosaic of deep shadows and warm lantern light. Machiavelli moves silently through the narrow lanes, the echo of his boots muted against the damp stones. The air smells faintly of wet earth and smoke from distant hearths, a reminder that life continues unseen, while power circulates in subtler currents. Every closed shutter, every sideways glance, every hurried footstep is a lesson in the language of perception. Earlier that evening, he attended a private gathering in a quiet palazzo near the Piazza della Signoria. The room was lit by clusters of candles whose flames bent and wavered in soft drafts, turning walls into shifting tapestries of shadow. The nobles spoke of alliances, of trade, of threats, whispered behind closed doors. But Machiavelli's attention was drawn not to the words themselves, but to the gestures surrounding them. A finger brushing a document, a quick exchange of eye contact, a slight leaning toward a companion. Each action was a signal, a note in the complex symphony of observation. Soderini watched him from across the room, a faint smile beneath the shadow of his brow. Perception, he murmured when Machiavelli approached, is the instrument of influence. Master it, and even silence may carry weight. Machiavelli nodded, sensing that the lesson extended beyond the room's walls. Influence is both what is displayed and what is concealed. The two must harmonize or risk collapse. Across the hall, a minor diplomat argued passionately about the merits of a proposed trade agreement. His gestures were expansive, his tone confident. Yet, as Machiavelli observed, a subtle tension in the diplomat's shoulders betrayed uncertainty. The other nobles noticed it too, though most were polite enough to ignore it. Influence is delicate. It grows strongest when attention is guided, yet never forced. The man who understands this can shape judgment not by force, but by gentle persuasion of perception itself. Later, alone on a small balcony, Machiavelli surveys the city. The Arno glimmers beneath lanterns, reflecting buildings like distorted mirrors. He sees not only the water, but the motion within it, small boats moving silently, their occupants unaware of how much they reveal by instinct alone. Influence is everywhere, he realizes, in every glance and gesture, in every shadow and reflection. The world interprets what is given, and misreads what is withheld. Those who master perception can manipulate both. He recalls a lesson from a minor counselor. Men judge by the contours of presence, by the rhythm of movement, and by subtle shifts in attention. Words are fragile. Perception is durable. Machiavelli feels the truth in it resonate deeply. One misstep, one overlooked nuance, and the carefully constructed illusion of control collapses. Yet, executed with precision, perception can elevate a man above those who rely solely on words or force. The night deepens. A breeze moves through the streets, carrying with it distant conversations, the faint scrape of shutters, and the restless hum of the city. Machiavelli allows himself to absorb it all, the ebb and flow of attention, the invisible judgments, the silent measurements of character. This is the terrain upon which influence is navigated, not walls, not armies, not proclamations, but the subtle currents of how men are seen, and how they see one another. He steps back from the balcony, letting candlelight flicker across the worn wooden floor, shadows dancing as though alive. The city sleeps or pretends to, but the architecture of perception remains, active and relentless. Machiavelli feels its pull, the quiet demand for awareness, patience, and careful maneuvering. Influence is a dance, not a declaration, and mastery lies in understanding the rhythm before stepping into the spotlight. Tonight, he closes his eyes with the quiet certainty that the climb is not only about power or ambition. It is about becoming attuned to the gaze of the world, shaping its judgments with subtlety, and moving through spaces where the smallest gesture may carry monumental weight. In the dance of perception, Machiavelli is beginning to learn the steps, and the city itself has begun to watch him back. Morning breaks over Florence in a pale wash of gold, the sun glinting faintly on terracotta rooftops slick from the previous night's rain. The city exhales, releasing the subtle scents of wet stone, bread ovens, and the faint tang of river water. Machiavelli steps onto the balcony of his lodgings, letting the air press against his skin like a reminder of impermanence. Today is a day for lessons in subtlety, the unspoken rules of appearance, that shape the currents of influence more than any proclamation or argument. He recalls a gathering in the Palazzo Vecchio weeks prior, where an assembly of nobles and advisors had debated the extension of Florence's trade agreements. Men of power spoke with force and conviction, yet Machiavelli noticed the invisible hierarchy of presence. One minor noble's voice was mild, his stance unremarkable, yet the careful placement of his hands, the precise angle of his cloak, the slight nod of acknowledgement toward Soderini earned him more attention than those who spoke louder or with more flourish. Influence, he realizes, is crafted in perception, in appearance, and in timing. A candle flickers in the corner of the room, shadows dancing across manuscripts and maps. Machiavelli traces the lines of ink, imagining the flow of alliances as rivers cutting through terrain visible to the untrained eye, only as markings, but readable to one attuned to currents of intention and desire. Appearance is the vessel that carries influence, yet it is hollow without the substance beneath. The man who masters the look of authority must pair it with a comprehension of consequences, a knowledge of human weakness, and a patience to act only when conditions are precise. He remembers observing a minor emissary at a court gathering. The man was cautious, measured in his steps, careful not to draw undue attention. Yet each subtle tilt of his head, each deliberate pause, and each choice of words aligned with his gestures crafted a persona far stronger than those who shouted their knowledge. Machiavelli understands that appearances are a currency, overdrawn. They invite scrutiny. Mismanaged, they invite ridicule. Yet when perfectly calibrated, they compel trust, curiosity, and silent respect outside. Florence hums with life, the distant hammering of blacksmiths, the soft clatter of wagon wheels, the muted calls of merchants ranging their wares. Machiavelli walks among the people, noting their movements as much as he notes their expressions. In appearance, there is truth, but it is often masked. A calm exterior may conceal ambition. A cheerful tone may veil resentment. To navigate influence, he must learn to read both the presented and the hidden. Soderini's words echo in his memory. Niccolo, men act in ways that reveal themselves, even when they seek to hide it. Appearance is a guide, sometimes the only guide to their intent. Attend to it, interpret it, and adjust yourself accordingly. Influence is not given. It is signaled, recognized, and claimed. Later, in a small courtyard lined with ivy and stone, Machiavelli observes a group of minor counselors at a brief meeting. One man adjusts his gloves repeatedly. Another touches the hilt of his sword unnecessarily, while a third leans forward, speaking with measured calm. Each movement carries subtle messages: nervousness, authority, deference. Appearance becomes an instrument, shaping judgment, guiding attention, and manipulating perception without a word. Machiavelli considers his own posture, his own gestures. Influence is not only about observing, but also about projecting the proper image at the right moment. Every subtle shift, the tilt of a head, the steadiness of hands, the calm cadence of speech builds a scaffold upon which trust, respect, and attention can rest. To command influence, one must understand not only the currents of others, but the reflection of oneself within those currents. As the sun rises higher, glinting on wet stones and gilded rooftops, Machiavelli notes the lessons that linger. The smallest gestures speak loudly. The carefully managed appearance can outweigh eloquence, and influence often travels silently, carried on perception rather than proclamation. Today, the city seems to hold its breath, waiting to see who commands attention not by voice alone, but by the mastery of presence and the deliberate art of appearance. The afternoon sun settles into a muted haze, gilding the rooftops and turning the Arno into a liquid mirror that reflects both sky and the slow passage of life along its banks. Machiavelli walks through the narrow lanes, aware that influence is as much about the framing of a man as the actions he takes. Every gesture, every choice of cloak, every measured tone is a note in a symphony of perception. To misstep is to invite scrutiny. To move with intention is to command silent authority. Earlier that day, he observed a minor envoy presenting an argument before the council. The man spoke competently, yet Machiavelli noted that a slight hesitation in his cadence, the twitch of a sleeve, and the overextension of his hand subtly diminished his credibility. Perception, Machiavelli reflects, does not rely solely on truth or logic. It is a fragile interplay of timing, gesture, and projection. Influence can falter if the signals are misaligned, even when the content of one's argument is sound. He recalls Soderini voice during a private council. Niccolo, no man can claim power without attending to the mirror others hold up before him. Appearance, even more than words, dictates who is believed, trusted, or ignored. Learn to read it, and you learn to guide it. Machiavelli's mind lingers on the subtlety of this teaching. A man may display brilliance in thought, yet remain invisible without mastery of the outward image. In a courtyard warmed by afternoon light, he observes counselors ranging documents and conversing in low tones. One man tilts his head with deliberate curiosity, signaling engagement while maintaining an air of restraint. Another smiles faintly, letting his gaze linger on the most influential figure in the room. Each action is a thread, weaving a tapestry of impression that will outlast the spoken word. Machiavelli notes how the alignment of action and appearance guides attention, channels respect, and shapes authority before any formal decision is made. Later, he walks past the river, where merchants argue quietly over goods. The smallest acts measured patience, deliberate eye contact, steady hands convey more than words. He recognizes that appearance is the vessel for credibility, and credibility is the scaffolding upon which influence rests. A man perceived as composed, deliberate, and attuned earns trust more efficiently than one who boasts or commands overtly. The art of appearance is an invisible architecture that must be respected, preserved, and deployed with precision. As the shadows lengthen, he enters a quiet chamber, the flicker of candlelight turning maps and parchments into shifting mosaics of gold and shadow. Machiavelli considers his own posture, his own voice, the subtle choices of expression and movement that convey composure, intelligence, and patience. Influence, he understands, is not merely the reward of knowledge or skill. It is the careful curation of one's image, harmonized with the currents of expectation and perception in the rooms one inhabits. Outside, the city breathes gently, its muted sounds carrying faintly the murmur of distant conversation, the clatter of footsteps on wet stones, the occasional toll of a bell. Machiavelli senses that the lessons of appearance extend beyond any single council or audience. Every interaction, public or private, is an opportunity to shape perception, to guide judgment, and to assert silent authority. To master influence is to master the delicate interplay of projection and observation, of subtlety and attention. As evening folds over the city, Machiavelli remains attentive, walking with measured grace through the lantern-lit streets. Each turn, each pause, each glance is deliberate. Influence, he understands, is a craft of nuance. A single misstep can undo years of careful observation. A single measured action can elevate a man far above competitors whose words alone cannot hold sway. The dance of appearance is continuous, and mastery requires vigilance, patience, and unerring awareness. Night settles over Florence like a dense cloak, heavy with the scent of damp stone, smoke from hearths, and the faint aroma of river water. The city seems to hold its breath, and Machiavelli walks among the lantern-lit streets, aware that tonight, perception is alive, watching, testing, weighing every gesture. Influence is silent here, carried in measured glances, the tilt of a shoulder, the calm in one's stride. Appearance is more than art. It is survival, currency, and armor all at once. Earlier, in a private audience with a visiting envoy, Machiavelli observed the subtle interplay of impression and expectation. The envoy spoke with eloquence, yet his nervous fidgeting a fleeting glance to a superior, a slight tremor in a hand undermined his authority. Those present absorbed the signals, consciously or not, and judgments were formed in the imperceptible moments between words. Machiavelli notes how fragile influence is when appearances betray intention. He recalls Soderini's lesson, Niccolo, a man's presence precedes his words. Even the wisest argument fails if the image it travels in is flawed. Cultivate the vessel of perception, and the substance within will command notice. Machiavelli contemplates the depth of this teaching. Mastery of appearance is not deception, but alignment projecting the essence of capability, patience, and discernment in every motion, every look. On the Ponte Vecchio, he watches a merchant handling delicate glassware. One misstep, a dropped goblet, and the fragile items shatter. Yet the merchant handles them with calm precision, turning a potential disaster into a demonstration of competence. Machiavelli sees that appearance alone can command confidence and respect, subtly shaping perception, even when the outcome is uncertain. Influence, he realizes, is a mirror. The observer sees only what is presented, yet the reflection guides belief, trust, and opportunity. In the quiet of a shadowed alley, he observes a nobleman greeting a companion with measured courtesy, the hand extended, the bow executed with just enough inclination, the tone steady yet deferential. Each component is deliberate, each carefully tuned to project authority without arrogance. The lesson is clear. Influence thrives on the harmony of gestures, speech, and bearing. The man who disregards these elements risks undermining not only his standing, but the fragile web of alliances upon which power depends. The wind shifts, carrying the scent of wet stone and distant fires. Machiavelli pulls his cloak tighter, aware that mastery of appearance requires vigilance at all times, whether in public councils, quiet streets, or private encounters. Every shadow holds a witness. Every reflection in water or glass can shape judgment. A single misalignment, slight fatigue in posture, too casual a gesture, an unguarded expression may ripple outward, unnoticed by the untrained eye, yet decisive in the eyes of the powerful. Back in his study, candlelight flickering across parchments and maps, Machiavelli contemplates the day's lessons. Influence is not the loud proclamation of ideas or force. It is the continuous, subtle orchestration of perception. A man who can align appearance with competence, patience, and discretion moves invisibly yet effectively through the corridors of power, commanding notice without effort, shaping judgment without confrontation. He gazes out the window at the quiet city, the Arno reflecting lanterns like scattered stars. Florence sleeps, yet the currents of observation remain, unseen yet unceasing. Machiavelli feels the weight and promise of the path he has begun to understand. The mastery of appearance is not merely strategy, it is the foundation upon which influence is built. To shape perception is to shape reality itself, to bend attention without command, and to ascend without leaving the trace of force. As he extinguishes the candle, shadows claim the room, and he lets the silence settle. Influence, he understands, is a living thing, subtle, delicate, and relentless, and tonight, he is learning to move within it as a conductor moves within a symphony, guiding every note, every pause, every resonance with intention and care. The first light of dawn drifts slowly over Florence, brushing the rooftops with a pale, uncertain glow. Mist rises from the Arno, curling around the bridge arches, and the city exhales a soft, damp breath. Machiavelli steps into the quiet streets, the chill pressing against his cloak, and feels the rhythm of time as tangible as the stones beneath his boots. In every moment lies opportunity or peril. The power of timing is subtle, measured not in haste, but in patience. In the deliberate pause that precedes action, he recalls a council meeting the previous week, where a proposal for a new tax levy had been tabled. Some spoke loudly, their arguments rushed and forceful. Others lingered, waiting, observing, measuring the room before committing their voice. Machiavelli noticed immediately how those who spoke too early were drowned by the voices of others, while those who waited, striking with precision, carried influence disproportionate to their numbers. Timing is not merely a choice. It is an art that shapes perception, governs alliances, and defines the path of power. The Palazzo Vecchio looms ahead, its stone walls soaked with centuries of ambition and fear. Machiavelli pauses under an archway, letting the cold damp seep into his bones. The city is silent now, but he knows that every whisper of movement, every tick of the distant clock, carries meaning. A door opened too soon, a message delivered prematurely, a gesture made before the moment is ripe. Each can undo years of careful strategy. To act without patience is to reveal oneself as impatient, vulnerable, and predictable. Earlier, a minor emissary had arrived, eager to present his argument on trade with Lucca. He spoke with fervor, gesturing broadly, ignoring the subtle shifts in the council's attention. Machiavelli observed as the assembly, subtly, turned away from him, their eyes seeking the quieter, more deliberate voices in the room. Influence, he understands, belongs not to the loudest or the swiftest, but to those who can read the tempo of events, who know when to strike, when to wait, and when silence speaks louder than words. Soderini had once said, "Niccolo, the world moves in currents. To swim against them too early is to be swept aside. To hesitate too long is to be forgotten." The man who masters timing becomes invisible, yet indispensable. The moment reveals itself only to those who understand the rhythm of change. Machiavelli walks beneath the arches of the courtyard, feeling the resonance of the lesson. Each step, each breath, each glance is part of a subtle choreography, one that, if misaligned, can unravel even the strongest plan outside. The river glimmers under the rising sun, the water moving neither fast nor slow, but with inexorable persistence. Machiavelli watches the currents, imagining them as the flow of events across the city, some slow, deliberate, others swift and unexpected. Timing requires both observation and anticipation, a careful reading of the forces in motion and the patience to act at the precise moment. Even the smallest delay can shift outcomes. Even the slightest premature move can provoke resistance. He reflects on an earlier incident, a minor negotiator delivering sensitive correspondence at the wrong hour, revealing intentions before the council was ready. The result was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet it shifted alliances and created ripples of mistrust that would take weeks to mend. Machiavelli understands now that time, carefully measured, is as powerful a weapon as any army or coin. As the city awakens, the distant clatter of carts, the faint voices of vendors, the occasional cry of a bird, he feels the weight of the lesson settle over him. Power exists not only in knowledge, loyalty, or appearance, but in the mastery of the temporal, the awareness that every action, every pause, every word carries consequences dictated by its moment in time. Influence is the patient art of placing oneself precisely where the world will notice, not too early, not too late, but when the current of events bends to receive it. Tonight, he will consider these lessons further in the quiet of his study, letting candlelight illuminate parchments and maps. Each line, each note is an exercise in timing, decisions recorded, observations noted, strategies imagined. Machiavelli knows that power is not seized. It is revealed to those who can wait, act, and move with the invisible pulse of the world around them. Afternoon sunlight filters through the latticed windows of a quiet study, dust motes drifting lazily in its glow. Machiavelli sits among parchments, the faint scent of ink and candle wax pressing close. Outside, the city moves at its ordinary pace. The Arno whispers against its banks. The hammering of a blacksmith echoes faintly from a side street, and a distant bell tolls. Steady and unhurried, he senses that every sound, every rhythm of the day, carries lessons about timing, the invisible pulse that governs the success or failure of all endeavors. Earlier, he had observed a minor emissary arriving at Soderini's council, with news of a rival city-state's maneuvers. The man's report was accurate, but delivered hastily, spilling details before the council had the context to interpret them. Eyes that would have been favorable turned to doubt. Another emissary, patient and deliberate, presented similar news later, allowing the council to perceive strategy and intent clearly. Timing, Machiavelli notes, governs not only attention but the shape of understanding itself. He reflects on Soderini's words, "Niccolo, To act without regard for the currents of time is to fight against the world itself. The moment dictates the power of your act, as the river dictates the path of a boat. Read the flow, and you guide it. Misread it, and it sweeps you aside. Machiavelli feels the weight of the lesson. Mastery of timing is both patient and precise, requiring foresight, observation, and restraint. In a courtyard later that day, counselors and advisors move quietly among documents and maps, each step deliberate, each gesture meaningful. A minor noble waits silently, his expression neutral, eyes fixed on the subtle changes in others' attention. Another shifts restlessly, eager to speak. The difference between the two is stark. One will gain influence, the other will fade into obscurity. Machiavelli realizes that timing is the invisible hand of authority. It bestows prominence, reveals competence, and marks those attuned to the flow of events. The river outside mirrors the city's rhythm, eddies forming where currents meet, invisible obstacles guiding the flow. Machiavelli considers that human interactions are much the same. The movements of men are subtle, the reactions nearly imperceptible, yet decisive. A statement made too early invites skepticism. Too late, and it is lost. Influence, he notes, is as much about waiting as it is about speaking, as much about restraint as it is about action. Earlier incidents resurface in his memory. A minor dispute between guild members, resolved not by force but by patient mediation. A delayed report that allowed the council to prepare for a rival's maneuver. A subtle pause in a negotiation that allowed the other party to reveal intent. Each illustrates a single truth. Timing shapes perception. Perception shapes judgment. And judgment shapes power. Evening approaches, and the city's noises soften the clatter of carts, the fading voices of merchants, the distant toll of a bell. Machiavelli walks among the streets, noting each movement, each pause, each gesture of those around him. Timing, he realizes, is the silent architecture of influence, and patience its foundation. To master it is to wield authority without effort, to guide events invisibly, to allow the world to act in accordance with the careful calculation of one who understands its rhythms. In the quiet of his study, candlelight flickering across maps and letters, Machiavelli considers the subtle art he is learning, the balance of anticipation and restraint, the precise recognition of opportunity, the ability to act when the currents of time are most favorable. Influence is revealed not in haste, not in noise, not in brute force, but in the careful orchestration of moments. The power of timing, he understands, is the silent hand that guides empires, shapes alliances, and crowns the patient with unseen authority. Night drapes Florence in velvet shadows, the air cool with the faint scent of rain lingering from the afternoon. Lanterns flicker along the streets, casting long, wavering reflections in puddles, and the distant toll of a bell resonates like a heartbeat through the city. Machiavelli walks slowly, attuned to these subtle cadences. Timing, he knows, is not measured in hours alone, but in the alignment of events, gestures, and opportunities. Each movement carries weight, each pause potential consequence. Earlier, in a dimly lit chamber, he observed a minor diplomat presenting a request for resources to the council. The envoy spoke rapidly, eager to impress, and although the argument was sound, the hurried delivery undercut its weight. Eyes glanced to others, lips tightened, subtle shifts of posture betrayed judgment. Later, a patient observer, presenting the same proposal with deliberate cadence and pauses, commanded attention effortlessly. Machiavelli notes, the power of timing governs not only action but perception itself. He recalls Soderini counsel, his voice calm but firm. Niccolo, the moment is alive. Speak too soon, and you reveal uncertainty. Speak too late, and you surrender authority. The wise man waits until the moment aligns with opportunity, and acts as though the world itself leans toward him. Machiavelli walks the quiet streets, letting the words settle, understanding that influence is as much the control of timing as it is mastery of knowledge, loyalty, or appearance. At a bridge overlooking the Arno, he observes merchants and travelers negotiating in soft murmurs. One man raises his voice prematurely, stirring irritation. Another waits, observing expressions, timing his words to coincide with the attention of the crowd. The contrast is stark. The patient negotiator receives trust. The hasty speaker earns only distraction. Timing, Machiavelli realizes, is the subtle measure of advantage, the silent arrow that strikes only when the target aligns perfectly. As night deepens, he reflects on past lessons, delayed action that allowed rivals to overextend themselves, brief pauses that revealed hidden intentions, patient observation that uncovered alliances before they were declared. Each incident is a testament to the hidden architecture of influence, a careful orchestration of acts and silences, calibrated to the rhythms of events and men. The patient man moves unseen, yet his steps determine the shape of outcomes. The wind shifts, carrying the scent of wet stone, wood smoke, and distant incense from a convent. Machiavelli tightens his cloak, aware that every moment, even a solitary breath, can be significant. Influence is not seized by speed alone, but by an attunement to the currents of circumstance, the understanding of when to speak, when to wait, and when to let the world reveal itself. The timing of acts, he knows, is inseparable from their consequence. Returning to his study, candlelight flickers across parchments, maps, and letters, illuminating paths of possibility. He reviews each observation, each lesson, the counselor who waits, the envoy who hesitates, the merchant who paces his speech. In the deliberate measurement of time, the quiet orchestration of acts, Machiavelli sees the foundation of power. Influence is not claimed in haste. It is cultivated in patient alignment with the invisible pulse of events. Finally, he looks out over the sleeping city, the Arnois silver thread weaving through shadowed rooftops. The lessons of timing, patient and invisible, settle over him like a mantle. Influence is revealed to those who wait, who act with precision,